First, I want to thank the people who wrote my sermon for me today. For those of you who don't know, today's sermon is inspired and filled by those who listened to the announcements, who read the weekly announcements, who were not fooled by my mistyping of my own email address in those announcements, and found a way to email me some questions. Questions that I promised I would answer during this sermon. And I'm happy to tell you I will answer all of the questions that were sent to me completely and perfectly. Yes.
And correctly?
Well, I did not promise correctly, just that they'll be done. When I was thinking about this sermon, some people call it the question box sermon. Some people like to call it that. Other people call it the, whatever it is. This I call the only question. Partly in my mind, I was thinking about that old thing we all hear. The only question, or the only bad question, is the one you never ask. Now, I spent a little time in school. I don't know if that's necessarily true. There are some questions that don't necessarily need to be asked. But the kinds of questions that came in were beautiful and balanced and lovely. And I think one of the ways we're going to start is with one that is on maybe the what I would call the belovedly nerdy side of our spectrum. And I say that with all love for the person who asked. I'm not telling you who sent these questions. They might know. So this one could be condensed. It was a kind of a longer piece, so we condensed it into this question. Doesn't the fifth principle, which is the democratic principle in our goings-on here at this church in Unitarian Universalism, doesn't the fifth principle reinforce the dominant culture of white supremacy or whiteness in general? So, this is a wonderful question. As many of us know, some of the most heartfelt, some of the most devoted and important work we do in this faith community is through our work to establish an anti-racist identity for this congregation and for each one of us individually. And part of doing that requires that we face questions like this that might be hard or uncomfortable to face at times. And nothing could be more uncomfortable than starting to wonder whether the very things we put on our walls or on our entryway might be reinforcing what we seek to tear down. Now here is the question here are some of the ways that I see this question. What the principle says, it talks about the democratic process. What it doesn't say is a single word about voting. Can we together agree that the democratic process is different than voting? We don't have to agree. I think that. You can just snap and you think. Because I believe that they are different. Voting is such a common expression of democracy that we think about, and that we often conflate the two because they kind of go hand in hand. I don't know if anyone saw the recent voting in Indonesia. This was what I believe was, in a sense, like the most ballots cast in as short amount of time in any election in history. It took place on all of the archipelago islands. People worked for days. This is sad, but I think more than 100 poll workers, they died from exhaustion at counting the votes. So we take democracy seriously here. We take our right to vote not as seriously as many of us should. I just want to paint that we have friends and colleagues in other lands who take it very seriously. Now, democracy comes from the word demokratia, which came around 507 BC. This is where I like doing this stuff. And the true principle of rule by the people is what democracy means. It only lasted, even in Greece, a bird just came in, for about 200 years. That's about it. And then it went to a republic, which is what we have today, where we vote and elect individuals who then go and represent our best interests in Washington. I'm gonna only focus on the one question. And one of the questions about voting is this: what about the tyranny of the simple majority? What about when 51% wants something and 49% doesn't? Now, there are a lot of ways in our voting that that's taken care of, both at the movement-wide level, if you will, or the denominational level, and even in this church. Important things need either a 2/3 or in some cases a 3/4. At this church, it's only 2/3, but in some cases needs a 3/4 passage, like of a positive to pass something. So that's one way to mitigate against the tyranny of the simple majority, which is really the question here. And these are issues like public policy at this church. In a matter of public policy, a matter of calling a minister, the bird is almost gone, and it's gone. Or a matter of getting rid of the minister, all require, luckily, a 2/3 vote. But here is a lesson in the tyranny, not only of the simple majority, but of fractions in general, which are tyrannous. So there are 121 members of this church. To have a quorum, to vote on anything, what does anyone know what percentage we need? 1/5. 1/5 of 121 members, unless half a person wants to come, is 21. So 21 people could show up. And then to get something passed, even something big, only 14 of those 21 people need to vote a certain way to represent 121. Now, I am not saying revise the bylaws. Don't do it. It's crazy. No, we could. But I'm just giving you the idea that it's more than just the simple majority. It's also the way we think about gerrymandering, or something like that. Now, I've been at business meetings for this church. Almost every vote is virtually unanimous. I think a great deal of the last few years of that is owed very much to Junko and David Davis, who did a process of coming to agreement, of trying to lead or try to reach decisions by consensus, which is another way to start thinking about these votes. Voting, let me move on to one more thing, because I want to get to some other questions. But one of the other things that people don't like about voting is what we are governed by: Robert's Rules of Order. Here's something I'm guessing people don't know about Robert's Rules of Order. They were started by Henry Martin Robert, and they were started after he led a church meeting that essentially broke out in a brawl. And he was so embarrassed, ashamed, like a good Baptist boy, that he went home and wrote the Robert's Rules of Order based on parliamentary procedure in our government, in the mainland's government, in the continent's government. I'll get there. Here's something we don't know. His father, Robert's father, was Reverend Joseph Thomas Robert. He was the first president of Morehouse College. He was a minister, a Baptist minister in South Carolina, who was so mad about slavery and wanted abolition so much, he moved his entire family to Ohio, where it was not legal. Then he was the first president of Morehouse College. So I have heard at times people talk about the Robert's Rules of Order as also perpetuating the idea of whiteness and white supremacy culture. And that could be to a sense, but I really want people to understand that the true birth of these was a church meeting by the son of a minister abolitionist who was the first president of Morehouse College. So you can wow everyone in General Assembly when you know all those things, and they complain. So the answer is this: how democracy looks, yes. How it manifests in a system or a society can and does perpetuate white supremacy culture in this nation that this island is a part of. However, how we embody democratic principles at their best, does not necessarily have to look like that. And keeping a close eye on what happens, how we are expressing our deepest selves, is one important part of the work we do together. Question 2. I'm interested in your comment in a weekly message that you realized that you are not your body. I write a weekly column, and I had a thing about going into a sensory deprivation float tank. So stay tuned. That's a liberating realization. Do you have any more insights that you can share about who or what you are not? Insights might be helpful to others. So, what else I am not? This is a tricky one. I am not my body. That is the way of many people's thinking, that we have come forth in this earth in a body that mewed and screamed and cried and wanted milk and wanted sustenance and grew. Our body. It's so physical. Over time, we start to have experiences, perhaps, that move us a little bit away from the idea that we are not only our body. That is the way I think about it, that we can have experiences that transcend a physical sense, perhaps. Now, for me, I was in this float tank, and I have like a shoulder problem, you don't need to know. But I couldn't decide if I should be like this or like this. For those of you who don't know what a float tank is, it's a pitch black tank heated with water to your body temperature and hypersalinated, so you essentially float right on top of it. And there's no sound. You use earplugs to keep the salt in your ears out. You do all this kind of stuff. So you have no bodily senses happening. And so I was in this float tank, and I was having a sensation at one point, after I figured out the shoulder thing, that I was falling forward, just into nothing. It was wild. And then my hand touched the side of the tank. And I was like, oh, that's right, no, I'm back here. But I was waking. It was like a waking dream. And to say that it led me necessarily to like a huge revelation about my life, that's not entirely true. It was a wild experience, but it did help me to come to a place, just like many other practices in our lives can help us come to a place that helps us realize that we are not bound to this thing in all of our senses and all of our ways of thinking, this thing being this body. And whether there are things that I am not, we're going to get to some of those questions a little bit later. So I have another question here. Do you pray? If so, what form does it take? Is it a daily practice at certain set times or just when you are called to do it? Do you seek prayer more frequently in times of personal need or for inspiration? Would you please share an example of a prayer when you are depressed or overwhelmed with life? One question. I'll just take them a little bit by this. I mean, yes, I pray. I pray here with you. I pray for you when you are not here in the mornings. Every time I put this on, I say a little prayer. For those of you who don't know, a stole traditionally is meant to indicate taking on the weight of the world upon your shoulders. Wow. That is what it means. So it would be, so sometimes, I know this sounds weird, I'll put it on and then realize I have to do something, like something very worldly, and I'll take it off. Because there are aspects of having it on that I have to be careful, not just with what it presents to the world, but what I'm holding here. I say a prayer almost every night when I go to bed, every night when I wake up, but a lot of times it's just please and thank you. Please and thank you are one of the finest prayers anyone could ever see or say in the world. You know, in the morning I wake up, I say please. At night I go to bed, I say thank you. Years ago, when I used to pray the most was when I would, because I lived in Manhattan, where just getting home was a freaking journey. And someone told me, every time you lock your door, just say thank you that you made it home. And that was a really good way to get kind of mentally there. Do I seek prayer more frequently in times of personal need or inspiration? Here's the way my prayer life works, and I know other people do too. It's like, if I have my normal life, but then something bad has happened. In those times, sometimes I find I don't want to pray as much because I'm mad at the universe or spirit or God or whatever it is. So I'm like, you know what? I got this. I'll handle it. I'll figure it out. I don't need that. Until it gets too painful. Like there's this like kind of 20% to say 55% in which I'm like, I'm good. I got this. I'm good. But then if it pushes into something really hard, then I'm like, duh. Now, this is not for everyone, because the next question is, well, what are you praying to? We're in a Unitarian Universalist church. Don't tell me about, this stuff. Luckily, we have another question here. How is prayer different than meditation? Okay, I'll get to the other one in a second. I have heard prayer described as this. Prayer is being oneself in the presence of the divine. And I like that. I like people who, or I know stories about people who walk in meditation, but some people think of it as prayer. I know people who do all these kinds of things it's sort of like if being oneself in the presence of the divine is prayer, meditation I see as being oneself, period. For me, again, I can't tell anyone what they should do, but these are the experiences I have with those two things. Prayer takes infinite forms, and so does meditation. And some of those forms are very similar in how they look, in how you do the thing. But some of them are widely different. So when I am praying, I am most likely hoping for, asking for, seeking, or being in wonder about a kind of intercession, that something might come into one's life who's suffering. Almost 100% of the time I pray for other people. I don't spend a lot of time praying for opening door number 1 or door number 2. I'm in Hawaii having the job of my life, so I don't need to open any more doors. So I'm usually praying for other people. So that's another piece. You can meditate on the wellness and the well-being of other people, absolutely. But for me, that feels more like prayer, when I am hoping or giving or sending good feelings or good energy to somebody else. Whereas in meditation, so you could look at it this way. In prayer, I speak. In meditation, I listen. And I am quiet to the sounds of my inner self, not just indigestion, but actual inner self that is happening in that moment. I am listening to what other inspiration is happening in my life. I have song constantly going in my head. There might be a song, and I'm slowly trying to move that away. My meditation life is pretty, I don't know, it's pretty wacky. If you want to talk more about it, you can. But I did a lot of training in this, and when I meditate, within a few minutes, I'm just seeing kind of colors, and maybe I'm oversharing. I know you think I'm nuts. But, so to me, they just feel so different that it's hard for me to answer, because to me they're so different. But it doesn't mean that for other people they can look very similar. Now, we haven't talked about contemplation, supplication, all of these things that a religious nerd would love to talk about. But since you didn't ask, next year, we'll get to that. So, the title of this talk is The Only Question, because in my mind I thought, this is the only question, the only bad question is one that doesn't get asked. And then someone sent me this question. The last question, the only question. What is your view about why we human beings are here? What are we doing in this life? I find it helpful to hear other people's views or experiences about this topic. Not that they will necessarily have the answer, but they may have some helpful insights. What are we doing here? That's a very good question. And I'll see you all next week. I'll tell you. It's not just because I'm some weirdo who studied literature or whatever, but when someone asks, what are we doing here? The Charge of the Light Brigade does come into my mind. For those of you who don't know the Charge of the Light Brigade, it's a poem. And in it, there is this one section that says, theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. And the Buddhist in me feels like I'm here, I gotta do stuff, because I might die. And that is a narrative, that's a script that runs a little while, and I find that it's not enough. If I just wanted to do, I could do that out there. I could not bore you all for an hour. And I could go out there and be riding waves or doing something else. So that tells me there's something more than just to do and die. Humans are amazing meaning makers. I was moving over the weekend and it rained a little bit. And I thought, oh, what a blessing. But I remember moving in some other times and thinking, oh, what a curse. I mean, we'll do anything to make it fit our purpose. Because not only are we great meaning makers, one of the ways humans have survived all of these generations is by predicting. When we see something move in the bushes, we don't snake, we run this way. Because that's how our ancestors lived. And that idea of predicting what something might be before we know exactly what it is serves us really, really well. Until it doesn't. Yeah. Right? I heard it until it doesn't. Because then we start making assumptions. Oh, he didn't hug me the way he usually hugs me. He's probably mad about the email I was thinking about sending him. That's just from my own brain. I don't know what's going on in your brains. This kind of predicting, this kind of nature, and I know I'm going a little over time, but this is what happens, when you give me what to write. This kind of predicting, this meaning making, leads me to believe that if I'm not here to just do stuff and die, if I want to do things like this, and I think I'm a meaning maker and I like to predict things that maybe aren't there, I start looking at things that go beyond, we'll call back to the first one, this physical form, that transcends something that I was rooted in, grounded in, made of these earth, metals, and things that you can find in the ground, yet I'm walking around. That alone is enough for me to start to think, oh, maybe this life means something. But then it's more than that. It's hearing just the right note in a Charlie Parker solo. It's not just music, it's about being on Pulliolo Ridge and looking through the pine barrens and then coming up and seeing that expanse out into a valley. It's about singing something just right, or being quiet in meditation or in prayer and thinking about how it is that I can love people better. All of these things start to give me a sense of inner joy or inner peace or some kind of being part of a stream of life. Somehow I'm interwoven into these ways of being. Now, it just so happens that the great Marilyn Robinson wrote an essay entitled, "What Are We Doing Here?" ? And far be it from me to tell anybody anything more than Marilyn Robinson can tell them. So I will just say that what she says is this: how we think about ourselves has everything to do with how we act toward one another. So this is the idea, whether it's in prayer, whether it's in meditation, whether it's in contemplation or supplication, whether we are living in this life, how we think about ourselves has everything to do with how we treat others. And in that, I think the why are we here question comes to fruition. It may not be just to love others, it may not be just to have joy in myself, but somehow finding a way to do those things together, to me, is the best indication of why we are here. I will close with Star Trek, which is what I might do every once in a while. I'm a next generation person. I don't care. You can cut it, slice it, dice it. I'm a next generation person. And in that version of Star Trek, everyone got everything they need. No one wants for anything, so they say. Of course, there's those side series where like, oh no, someone's really out of food and money. But mostly that's what it is. And so my question is, if I've got all that, if everything is taken care of, everything is taken care of, what is it that we really can do together as a people when we stop freaking fighting each other? That is what it is. To me, why are we here? Well, in this time, the only question that really matters is how can we stop fighting each other anymore? And then what can happen after that? So for me, that is many of the questions that I received, the 5 questions that I received. Hopefully you got the answers that you wanted. I know we've gone a little over, and if you didn't get the questions you wanted, they'll be answered every week here on Sunday at 10 a.m. And you can keep coming back and hear more and more. So maybe really the only question we are asking isn't just why we are here, but rather, who are we here with and for? Good. Now let's rise together and sing one of our favorite songs, Life Calls Us On.